Okay, so this week we're going to talk about developmental learning. So we're going to start with our first psychologist, Jean Piaget. Piaget developed the theory of cognitive development. So Jean Piaget was a psychologist that was assigned the task of translating English language IQ questions into French. And during this process, he became so intrigued with why children would get critical thinking questions wrong. And he decided that he needed to study the development of children and see how they thought, because according to Piaget, they weren't just less competent adults, they weren't just not good thinkers, they had a completely different way of thinking, and he wanted to divulge how that happened. So the theory of cognitive development is basically the theory that explains how children create these mental models of the world around them and use it to learn or develop. Piaget believed that intelligence was not this fixed trait. You weren't born with a certain amount of it. Instead, it grew over time with your maturity and with experience. The theory of cognitive development, in Piaget's word, was a genetic epistemology, which was basically the origins of learnings or how knowledge comes to be. Genetic referred to the beginning or the basis, and the epistemology is the categories of how things are. So according to Piaget, you had a base knowledge and you had a category that you expanded on for each level of knowledge. Now, the schema is a essential component to the theory of cognitive development. A schema is the basis of the cognitive model. They're buildable and they adapt as new knowledge is acquired. One example is a baby's sucking reflex. So that's an inherited schema. Babies are born knowing how to do that. And they adapt it throughout life pertaining to how we eat or how we pacify ourselves or etc. Schema work by assimilation. So we have an already possessed schema and we adapt it to something new. So with this, I think of my little cousin who used to call all dogs Mimi, because since he was a baby, his parents had a dog named Mimi. Dogs were Mimis. So when he met puppies, he would say, "Oh, look, baby Mimi," because he understood that this four-legged animal was called Mimi in his mind, and this was how he assimilated it. This is just a baby version of it. So assimilation is using this schema we already have and making it fit into something new. Accommodation happens more like when my aunt and uncle said, "No, not all dogs are Mimis. Mimi is a dog. Four-legged things are dogs." So the existing schema is not working and it must be changed. So now his schema has changed that four-legged things are dogs, not all named Mimi. Equilibrium is how Piaget said things work. Basically how development moves along. He didn't think that learning occurred in a linear pattern, and he didn't believe that children develop in a straight line from A to Z. Instead, development was maintaining this equilibrium between assimilation and accommodation. When assimilation does not work anymore, we must adapt to a new stimuli. Eventually, our schema will become more refined, and assimilation will get us by just fine until we come to a new conflict, which will make us accommodate and will regain our equilibrium. In the theory of cognitive development, there are 4 stages of development. So these are the categories where, from infancy to adulthood, Piaget broke down how people develop. So it starts with your sensory motor stage, which occurs from 0 to 2 years old, and the main achievement in this stage is object permanence. And from 0 to 2 years old, babies learn that things still exist even if they cannot physically see them. After the sensory motor stage, people move on to pre-operational stage, and this is for children 2 to 7 years old. The focus becomes symbolic thinking. You see a lot of this symbolic thinking in make-believe that children do. They understand that there's family roles and will maybe play house. and assign you're going to be the mom, you're going to be the dad, you're going to be the kid, you're going to be the family dog. And they know they are not the actual mom, dad, and dog, but symbolically they can play pretend because they understand these concepts. During this pre-operational stage, it's important to note that children 2 to 7 are still very egocentric, meaning they think in terms of themselves, and they think the world is seen the exact same way that they see it. After 7 years old until about age 11, children enter the concrete stage. And this is where the focus becomes operational thought. In the concrete stage, children no longer have to physically do things to guess or to test how they're going to work. So if you gave a 7 to 11-year-old a square block, a triangular block, and a circular block, they would be able to put it into the correctly shaped holes without having to wedge it or test it, because they have operational thought that says this square is only going to fit into the square, and so on and so forth. Finally, at 11 years old until adulthood, children enter formal operational stage. And this is the focus of thinking abstractly. So in the formal operational stage, children can test hypotheses to guess how the world around them is going to go. And they have logical reasoning at this state. So they can guess, hey, if I don't invite so-and-so to my birthday party, maybe they're going to be mad, etc. So with these stages of cognitive development, it's been used a lot in educational principles. One of them is discovery learning. Discovery learning is used a lot in primary education, and it's the notion that children learn best in a hands-on way. So as a teacher, not necessarily is the most valuable data the quantifiable data. It's the overall learning process that children have by doing things themselves. Discovery learning is going to be used in the Freud dollhouse study, but I'm going to skip over to Lev Vygotsky and we'll get back to this later. Lev Vygotsky was the second psychologist we learned about this week, and he developed the zone of proximal development, which is abbreviated as a ZPD. The zone of proximal development is the span between the current developmental level and their potential developmental level with adult or knowledgeable peers' guidance. So the ZPD is basically what a child can actually do with their skills if they were unassisted versus what they could possibly do with assistance. In educational literature, this is sometimes called scaffolding. It's synonymous with ZPD, although Vygotsky himself never used that term. Scaffolding basically states that once a task can be completed with assistance, that scaffolding can then be removed and the child can perform the task themselves. The scaffold is usually a more knowledgeable other, or the person who better understands the topic and serves to assist the learner. So we can think of the scaffold as a teacher or a coach. More often than not, it's just a more knowledgeable peer. And a more knowledgeable other doesn't necessarily have to be a person. It can also be a reference book or a tutorial or whatever gets the learner from point A to point B. So the zone of proximal development and this idea of scaffolding were used in a Wood and Middleton study in 1975. And the study was on these 4-year-old children who were assigned the task of building 3D models, which is naturally out of their ZPD. They don't have the skills to build it on their own. So the study observed how mothers interacted with their 4-year-olds to build this model. Through this Wood and Middleton study comes effective scaffolding, or what effectively works to help the 4-year-olds build the models. In the study they did, the most effective scaffolding was presented in a way that helped the child learn the most. In this case, when the mothers gave varying strategies, it helped them more than when the mother kept reverting to a single strategy. So mothers who gave them very specific instructions when they were struggling the most, and then backed off and just guided them with less specific instructions while they were performing the task well, and then reverted back to being very specific when they saw their child was stuck again. Effective scaffolding occurs by keeping the learner's interest or keeping them engaged in the topic at hand, making the task simple, emphasizing what will create a solution, controlling the learner's frustration, and demonstrating the task. So in education, you might think, I want to keep my student engaged. I want to make the instructions simple enough that they're not automatically turned off. I want to emphasize a solution or the end goal of this. And either through making it simple or just by positively re-encouraging them, I'm going to control their level of frustration. And when they're really not getting it, I'm going to demonstrate it so that they can see what it's supposed to look like. Now, I mentioned earlier the dollhouse study. This study was created to see if Piaget's study of discovery learning, or what was an educational model based on the theories of Piaget, was more helpful than Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And in the dollhouse study, children were to sort furniture in a house, and I believe they told the children they needed to explain to a puppet where the furniture was supposed to go. And they could do this task alone, which would be discovery learning, or with their mother's guidance, which would be the scaffolding. At the end of the study, the children whose mothers helped them were better at the task. This zone of proximal development has been used in education in more modern times, and that occurs through knowledge through social interaction, which the teacher serves to mediate as children learn from one another. This can be inside or outside the classroom. Reciprocal teaching, which is where students learn from a text and they learn the skills of summarizing, questioning, clarifying, and then predicting. And the last educational application is collaborative learning. So group members are there to help each other within their zone of proximal development, meaning students who are a little bit higher performing or who have more knowledge of the topic can help group members who have a little bit less understanding of the topic. So that concludes our lesson for this week on developmental learning. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in class.